Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, coming up, a look at the big education issues confronting this state. But first, Governor Wolf has an unexpectedly ambitious first several weeks, or maybe not. Back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, joining me as often is the case are two of the state's top reporters. John Micek, he's the editorial page editor of the Harrisburg Patriot News, and I got to mention PennLive, and Brad Bumsted, Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. I think we have their Twitter handles. We'll put them up. You can follow them on Twitter. I would advise you to do that if you want to keep up to date on what's going on. All right, here's what I said. An ambitious first several weeks, or maybe not. Brad, let me start with you. Or maybe not. What's the story?
It was whether it's unexpected or whether it was really, truly ambitious. But I think it has been ambitious. And I think the one thing that's impressed me about it, we can talk about some of the specific initiatives, whether it's lowering his proposal to lower the CNI, the business corporate net income tax. But what's impressed me is that Wolf has as a man on a mission in terms of meeting with legislators. After you had Governor Tom Corbett, who didn't give the legislature any love, they didn't like him because he prosecuted many of their own. Wolf has met in groups of 20 to 30. He's had leaders out to the mansion over and over again.
And he's dropping in unannounced,
dropping in unannounced. And he has, I'm told that by the end of February, he'll have met with every member of the legislature.
Really? 253 people?
Yes, and it's really amazing, and I think it really bodes well for him. It doesn't mean the Republican legislature is going to bend over and pass his policies.
And we're going to talk about that.
But it personalizes him and prevents them from maybe some of the vitriolic
John,
attacks.
What do you think?
No, I think Brad's right. I mean, we had Jay Costa, the Senate Minority Leader, through the office about a week or so ago. He said he had one meeting with Corbett out of the residence at the beginning of the term, and that was the end of it. And never a single meeting in the governor's office in the Capitol. And Wolf's been everywhere. He's down in the cafeteria talking to people. He's in the rotunda talking to tourists. I mean, he's been visible in a way, particularly contrasted with Tom Corbett, who was who was retiring and wasn't really that kind of active, hands-on guy. And I think Wolf, as a businessman, realizes that it takes this kind of one-on-one glad-handing if he wants to get the stuff done that he wants to get done.
Yeah, but let's go. Helps him a little.
I think it does.
Yeah, let's go to
the heart of relationship building, right? So
let's go to the heart of this. You guys have covered the Capitol for a long, long time, and you know that there are interests involved here, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. Particularly Republicans want liquor privatization. They want pension reform. The governor does not want to do their version of it. He has a very different set of ideas, as do most Democrats. And there's certainly a bit of congeniality involved, although the criticism by the Republicans on the open records of, firing Eric Arneson, the open records head, doing the moratorium on the death penalty without consulting lawmakers and the DAs and state troopers and others, it still come down to the interest that they have and what they want to see, notwithstanding whether they do kumbaya.
Interest and ideology. I mean, there is some ideology clearly fixed in privatization where Mike Turzai and the Republicans, he's the House Speaker, believe that the state should just not be in the liquor business. That's driving part of it, as well as some interest groups that may contribute to their campaigns, whether it's drugstores, businesses, whatever, that might get to sell some of the liquor in privatization. And on the other side, with Democrats, you have them supporting the union position where they don't believe any store should be closed, so there should be no job losses, and that's part of it. And so they therefore go with modernization of fixing up the current systems. And there are other alternatives, although many people think that ultimately it takes a mega deal to bring that through.
All right, John, if you, crystal ball time, you're an editor now, you get to write a lot of commentary pieces. No, that's great. That's great. Where's, if you had to sit back, We're going to hear a budget message next week. I think it's going to be aggressive, ambitious. It's going to be the full plate of ideas, yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've already seen some of that in concept on Wednesday week. Right. Governor Wolf was in the Lehigh Valley where he's talking about these business tax cuts that Brad alluded to a moment ago. We know that's going to be in there. That's something the business community has looked for a long time. Could be offset by this so-called combined reporting where they have to sort of tighten up loose ends.
Get more money,
right.
For this
I mean, we know there's probably going to be a minimum wage hike proposed in there. Yeah. We know there's going to be more money for schools. We know there's going to be a severance tax in there. It's going to be a very aggressive speech. It's going to tick a lot of the boxes that Wolf mentioned during the campaign. Exactly.
Yep. All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, there are a couple of other items that I think are likely to appear in the budget message. We'll take that up following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back with John Micek and Brad Bumsted, both reporters. One is now an editor. We're chatting here about Governor Wolf gives his budget message to the legislature, a pretty ambitious start. Brad, Governor Rendell had a pretty big surprise in his first budget message, didn't he? Go ahead.
Well, he did when he presented two budgets and the Republican legislature took the one he didn't want and passed it. But the point is that in 2003, Rendell had an ambitious agenda called A Plan for New Pennsylvania that was really almost a 4-year plan, very least a 2-year plan, where he asked for everything under the sun that he could ever want. And I think that's what we're going to see from Governor Wolf. That's going to be like that. It's going to be, here's everything I would do if I had a blank check to be able to do it. These are all the things that comprise my policy. And you might as well. I mean, if you're going to go for it, you might as well go big.
Well, the point is, John Micek, you can't negotiate what you don't have on the table, can you?
No, go big or go home, right? I mean, the question.
I like that. Go big or go home.
I mean, the question is how long it's going to take. You know, as Brad noted in 2003, there was that bifurcated budget. We were there for 2 days before Christmas. There was the 101-day endurance test in 2009.
That was the worst.
It was just flipping brutal because we were there until like the darkest days of summer, and it gets hot in the Capitol in summertime. I'll tell you what. But so I mean, so if Wolf comes out with
they turned the air conditioning off.
I think they actually did.
Left the garbage there too.
Oh, it was awful. But you know, I mean, if it's a protracted siege, and it likely could be, you know, we'll see, does this thing drag on? It almost certainly drags on past June 30th. The question is how long.
Yeah. But I think one of the differences that you make, I want to come to a comment, John. I'll come back to you for this. I want to go to Brad now on another issue. I'll come back on the self-esteem and what that point was about. It made a lot of news. I didn't make so much of it, but a lot of people did. But Brad, look, do these relationships that you guys been talking about help him at all, or help not him, meaning the governor, but the process? Do you think the process looks like it's going to be less vitriolic, less bitter, or do you think we're stuck because of these polar positions that they have?
No, I think it makes it a little better for a Democratic governor with a Republican legislature. It doesn't solve all the problems. There are still individual members who are going to be as acerbic in their comments as they want. Yeah. And nobody can stop that. But I think in the actual meetings with leaders and the governor, I think once you know somebody personally, it's harder to attack them. You may disagree with them and say, we're not going to do it, Governor.
It builds trust, I think, a bit. You know, something that often gets missing. And if you like someone and you trust them, aren't you more likely to make a deal?
You are, and especially the contrast with Governor Corbett, no disrespect, but he just did not meet with them. He did not talk to them. He did not give them information. So a guy who's, you know, throwing love on all these Republican legislators, they feel good about
hard
it.
To be mean.
Well, I mean, but what we do know, though, is they're not above a little hardball either.
Yeah.
As we saw with the open records dispute, there was a thing that was going on with the executive nominations. So you know, there's the public cuddliness, but you know, I mean, mean, with Katie McGinty, who's the chief of staff, she's no shrinking violet, and they play tough when they need to.
Quickly, I want to go to a lot of us were caught by surprise. The governor goes to the White House. We have these meetings down there, and he talks about self-esteem as a number one problem. You wrote a bit about that. I don't get that. I mean, I understand a bit of it. What was your take on it?
So Wolf said in this National Governors Association meeting in Washington last week, and he's asked, what's the biggest economic development challenge facing Pennsylvania? Okay. And he says part of it's self-esteem, where the governor has to act as a cheerleader and highlight all the great stuff that the state has, forests and ports and people,
governors do that all the
which
time.
Is what they're supposed to do. And sometimes he thought that the state didn't blow its own horn loudly enough. But people heard the self-esteem thing, and they thought he was getting all cuddly and psychobabbly, and everyone everyone piled on. The problem is that he's not far from wrong.
Yeah.
I mean,
you going to disagree with that?
He phrased it.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
But no, go ahead.
No, only to the extent that it was a poor choice of words by his own admission.
Yeah,
he said, I should have not have put it that way, okay? But the underlying message is right. And again, it's the contrast with Corbett, where we didn't have a cheerleader for the state. With Rendell, we did, whether you like him or not. He was
nobody in modern history was a bigger cheerleader than Governor Rendell.
So there was a poor choice of words, is how Wolf put it. But and it sounds disrespect, Terry, but it sounds professorial. Like you're lecturing the group about...
Well, look, he's a PhD, for gosh sake. What do you expect from him?
Right, political science, no less.
That's right, being prof. All right, John, I want to come to Brad in a minute on some court elections, but before I let you go, what's the effect of this? Is this one of these things where,
it was a fun little story in the middle of the week? Is it going to turn the ship of state or damage him long term? No, it's just one of these hiccups, and it was a great talking point for a day or two.
Yeah, all right.
And a lot of good jokes around the Capitol.
Yeah, oh, well, reporters don't have jokes. We know that. You guys never do it. All right, we have these, and we'll get into this more as we get closer to May. Never seen this situation on the Supreme Court where we have 3 seats that have to be filled. That's a record. I think you have to go back, and I think someone researched this 18th century to find out what's going on there. We have about a minute.
Well, there's really only 2 that are
2, but 3 elections.
Yes, and one is Coriel Stevens, the justice who was an interim appointee, and he says never asked not to run, which is always the tradition. So he's running,
3 people would like.
Right, but the other 2, they were trying to name 2 people to quickly fill these seats so there would be a full complement of 7 justices, but they fell through when one of the justices, the Republican, had sent this email that was racially inappropriate, let's just say, and that became an issue. And the other nominee, Ken Gormley, the dean at Duquesne Law School, there were a couple issues raised there, but if you really look closely at it, they were tenure disputes, but he sunk by the weight of Kistler, the Republican judge, going down.
So we go with 5? 5, there are 7 people on the Supreme Court.
99% certain that's what will happen unless lightning strikes.
Hey, watch those emails. We had the pornographic email scandal, right, John?
I think twice before you hit send, maybe 3 times. Yes,
3 times send. All right, great update. All right, education funding. How is the education funds distributed? What about charter school reform? We'll get to that with a representative from the Pennsylvania School Board Association. His name is John Callahan. He's my guest coming up.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Well, John Callahan, he's the Senior Director of Government Affairs with the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. They govern the schools. These are the elected officials in this state that govern the 500 school districts. All right, John, last fall, voters cast votes. Every poll said the single most important issue in the state is education, and the voters want more funding. Now, it's a little controversial how we get the funding, but explain to the folks what are the funding needs.
I mean, those polls, you're right. Almost every poll out there said education, education, education. Now, did it delineate exactly what people meant by that? Yeah. Not really.
But they do want more funding.
Yeah, people recognize that education leads to a better economy, leads to a better future, and gets rid of some of the problems that we see out there if we invest in it. So that's what I think we're hoping to see in the budget address coming up. And I tell you what, investing in education, fixing the funding formula, actually making it equitable. And then, there's other things within the pensions, pensions within the education system, which
so you
help
got
out.
Those three things. All right, let's talk about educate. What the net effect of the funding situation has been: teacher and staff layoffs, property tax hikes, and program curtailments. In some of the surveys that have been done of school districts, we're talking about, 2/3 or something like that of excess have one sort of problem. What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about past years, no matter which way you look at it, you can cut it in all kinds of different ways, and that's all politics. We've seen teacher reductions, we've seen kind of staff reductions, and we've seen people having to adjust their program and increase taxes. I mean, that's when you're talking about school boards, we're the people that actually have to make that vote, which is the toughest thing you can do.
Not always popular,
Not
right?
at all popular.
Not always popular.
But that's just what you have to do to fund education.
Well, do you have any expectation? I mean, obviously the governor ran on a platform of increased education spending, and by the way, so many Republicans have talked about that, so that could be. So do you have a dollar figure in mind, or are you just going to wait and see Tuesday what the governor... I mean, it's not like any of us can do anything about it anyway, right?
Well, we can. He's made up his mind by now, right. I hope. Right. But there are three things. I mean, increased funding for education is one, and we would hope to see that. But you can't ask for increased education money without actually figure out the way that you distribute it in a fair way.
I want to get to that.
And then third is allow school districts to save money. Allow them to figure out, get around mandates that are out there. If a mandate is on them that doesn't make sense, that they can save money and that they can be good for the kids, allow them to waive that mandate. Save dollars.
All right, let's go to an important issue, and you alluded to it a couple of times, and that's figuring out a way to distribute the money that's, quote, fair. And fair, it can be controversial. There's a funding commission that's been moving around the state doing hearings, bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans on the commission. If you had a bet, what would you folks who run the schools like to see in that formula? What are the elements that have to be in it?
It has to be transparent. I mean, first, we haven't had a funding formula, and that's the problem, that funding kind of gets haphazardly put around. It's not ethical, I'll even put it that way. So what do we expect in it? We expect it to be simple so that the public can understand it, and our school districts can be accountable for it.
So when folks come in and talk to you, can say, this is the criteria that was used to give us the money.
Exactly. English language learners should be in there.
Right.
Poverty should be accounted for. Something called sparsity, which would be how spread out your school district is.
So
like Forest
County.
Rural
means more cost and transportation.
Exactly. Something like cost of living. It costs a lot more to actually do education in Philadelphia, let's say, than Indiana, Pennsylvania. So there are differences there. So there's factors that can make that money come out from the state in a lot more fair way.
Okay. And we hope, and we're going to run to a break, but you hope that sometime this spring they'll make their report and the legislature will use that formula to spend the money for this year?
That's right.
Next fiscal year.
Well, exactly.
All right, coming back, charter schools, controversial or not? Well, more controversial than not in some cases. I'll talk with John Callahan about that.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
John Callahan from the Pennsylvania School Boards Association is with me. We're talking a variety of the big education issues that are now in front of the legislature and likely to have some action by the legislature and the governor within the next couple of months. All right, it's almost every session of legislature, we get into this issue of charter schools. What's the current situation with school choice and, charter schools?
It's pretty close. Now, I think with charter schools, we're out there. It's competition between public schools and charter schools. People see it that way, but I don't always see it that way. I see it as we're in a marketplace for education, and quite frankly, we just have to make sure the playing field between the two is level, and that there's accountability for both school systems, I guess you could say.
Public and private. Well, one of the issues I think has to do with funding. Just explain that briefly. The funding, school districts have to go ahead.
School districts have to, they have their money that they raise from the local tax dollars. They also get money from the feds, and they also get money from the state.
Right.
And from there's a formula that kind of takes it out to the charter schools. Okay. And it's always been a debate of what's the true cost of educating a kid in a charter school, or even educating a kid in a cyber charter school. And are we overpaying, or are we underpaying? And that's really where the conflict sometimes comes in.
So is your point there's not the same kind of scrutiny that public schools have to go through for many charter schools, and as a result of that, not sure that the dollars spent are wisely spent and that the same standards apply? Did I state that incorrectly?
You kind of hit it right on the head. I mean, we would look for auditing requirements, more ethical requirements on their school boards. We want some transparency. Sometimes we don't know how all those dollars are spent within the charter investment that you have.
Now, some public schools have public charters, right?
Yes. I mean, some of us do have our own charters, our own kind of even cyber academies themselves. And that's one instance where sometimes our cyber academies are significantly less costing than a cyber school that we typically see out there. And that's something that my members look at and say, why is that difference?
Okay, so bottom line here is legislature, again, we have a charter bill. I don't know how many. I just read where there was at least one that I was looking at introduced. Any prospect for passage? This would be regulatory, do some of the stuff you're talking about.
We have one in the House that's moving. It's a good first step. There's still more we can do with charter reform and trying to get it right and trying to put accountability in the system. That's the biggest issue. And I'm not afraid of accountability for public schools, and I don't think the charter community is afraid of accountability either. All
right. Well, thanks for coming in. A good update. We're going to obviously follow the path of education funding, charter schools, and the Fair Funding Commission. And we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.